afternoon's discussion is eating the rainbow. We'll get there. The biggest cause of death during our great-grandparents' time was from what we call communicable diseases. Think of the Spanish flu and the Black Death. So pathogens transferred from person to person, and they had no defense against this. So your lot in life essentially was just time and chance. If you were exposed to a pathogen that could kill you, it probably would. However, modern advances in medical knowledge and technology have mostly been able to eradicate these communicable diseases, or at least treat them so they aren't as deadly. If we look at modern death certificates, the cause of death has changed. Most people now die from lifestyle diseases. And the examples you can see here are obesity, diabetes, stroke, heart attacks, etc. So, what has changed that has caused this problem to arise? Well, you have all heard of the infamous Bermuda Triangle. That triangular area off the coast of Cuba where ships, planes and people have just mysteriously vanished. So, I would like to introduce you to my lifestyle and food Bermuda Triangles. These are far more deadly and claim the lives of millions of people every year. You would have heard of the term metabolic syndrome. This refers to a person being overweight, having insulin resistance, diabetes, and hypertension. This will result in macrovascular problems such as heart, kidney, and nerve disease, and they will also have microvascular issues, for example, retinopathy, stroke, and dementia, because they have problems with these small blood vessels. Where does this problem arise from? Here, if we look at the first Bermuda Triangle, we see a lack of exercise, prolonged or undue stress, and also the type and the quantity of food that we eat. This is very, very different from what people ate years ago. Then if we look at the second Bermuda Triangle, we can see here that there were three major industrial developments that caused a very big change in food production from around about the 1930s. Firstly, vegetable oils were hydrogenated to produce margarine. They were very popular because firstly they were solid at room temperature, so that it was much easier to spread them and easier to handle. And they also didn't become rancid like butter does. And that's obviously a distinct advantage in warm countries, but a serious health risk. The cereal industry exploded after World War I. Here, refined carbohydrates were extruded through pipes to produce dry, processed cereals. These are then coated in sugar to give flavor, and essentially they became the first convenience food. This completely changed the way people ate breakfast. And if you're a teacher, you always know the kids that have had cereals for breakfast. By 9 o'clock, they're scratching in their bags to find their food because they can't wait till first break. Food that comes in a packet or a box is usually processed. It's not real food and usually contains a really high percentage of trans fats from partially hydrogenated oils. Then the third part of this triangle is the fast foods we all know that have become enormously popular, and you can find them on every street corner. But they are not only unhealthy, the portion sizes have progressively increased over the years, leading to enormous problems. Why should we care? Our hope for eternity comes from God's word. So if we go back to the Bible and look at what our Creator gave us to eat and recommended, we should find what He says is good for us. But before we do that, let's look briefly at what constitutes good nutritional food from a modern nutritionist point of view, and then we can see how this matches up with God's list in the Bible. So, nutritionists agree there are 5 essential food groups, 5 fabulous food groups: fruits, vegetables, grains, protein, and dairy. Note here that each pie slice is exactly the same size. So when you're choosing your plate of food for a day or that for your family, always try to make sure that you get an equal portion of each of the 5 food groups. So even within groups, we also need to be careful of some of the advice that we get. So in this table, we agree with the 5 main food groups, but sometimes there are errors. And we've covered the problem of cereals and refined grains. Even in this well-published healthy food pyramid, we also find outdated information. The largest triangle slice on the bottom shows too high a proportion of carbohydrates, and especially if they are refined. Sugar is highly detrimental to your health and diet, and interestingly, it is never ever mentioned in the Bible. And perhaps a good reason to eradicate it from your diet wherever possible. So, in putting together your ideal plate of food, we need to do so from God's perspective and also from our understanding today of the 5 fabulous food groups. Always remembering that what you eat gives you the energy to do exercise, to build strong muscles, to support your bones, and to do all those fun things in life. It also gives you a much greater chance of being disease-free and not being a burden to your partner or your family at a young age. So keeping these 5 fabulous food groups in mind, these are the foods mentioned in the Bible. Firstly, the fruit and nuts. And it's interesting to see how in modern literature you find the term superfoods, and how many of this list here you see is actually mentioned in that superfood list, just because everything is just so nutritionally dense. Sycamore fruit is just edible figs. And then you get to vegetables and legumes, and not only are they packed with protein, vitamins and minerals, but remember they're also a very, very important source of fiber. The gourds that are listed here in 2 Kings really refer to those vegetables that are grown on a vine. So it would be things like cucumbers, courgettes, squashes and pumpkins, which all grow well in South Africa. Then if you have a look at the grains, here you can see a variety of grains that have become actually really, really popular today. So I'm just thinking back about 10 years ago. If you went to a place like Bakertown to get all your grains to bake with and things like that, that's all you could get was refined ones. And it was really hard to find different rices and things, whereas now things like flour, millet, spelt, barley, the chia seeds, you can get everything in big quantities, and it's really, really inexpensive. So they were important also in Bible times, because you were able to keep them for such a long time, as well as being the fact that they were very nutritious. Then if we look at the dairy products, not only do they provide a great variety, but they can also cook them in a wide variety of ways, and dairy products are able to be included in the other food groups and very easily. The curds that are mentioned in Isaiah really refer to the way that that milk was fermented. So milk would be put into vegetable skins that have been sewn up together and then just left. And probably your best example of curds today would be what you call lebanon, and you can buy that on the street corner in Israel. And essentially, it's just yogurt, but it's far more chunky than what we have and less sour. Then if we go along to your proteins, the Bible distinguishes very carefully between clean and unclean meat. Perhaps we are a bit more flexible these days because we've got refrigeration. The birds that were listed here are partridge, pigeon, quails, and doves. And we know there were chickens because the rooster crowed after Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. And then fish was a very, very important staple. Perhaps living around the lake would have made a big difference. And, you know, a lot of them were mentioned in the parables. Then the seasoning, spices, and herbs were a really, really important part of flavoring foods. And you just think of all the flavors, the herbs and spices that you like to use, and just think how many of them are actually mentioned here and are very important. Miscellaneous foods of the Bible, you can see clearly fit into all of the 5 food groups. And don't be fooled into thinking that honey and sugar are the same thing. The one is natural, made by God, the other is refined, consumed, and abused by man. So honey was seen as a very valuable asset in the Bible, and for good reason. As you can see here on the right, not only does it contain a lot of energy, vitamins, and minerals, but it has a variety of other functions as well because of the ingredients it contains. But important to remember that processing destroys those valuable nutrients. So commercial honey often has syrup or sugar added to it, and it has been heated. So very important to buy raw honey from a trusted source if you want to have all the benefits that God has added to that. So salt is mentioned in the Bible as something which is associated with preservation because you're keeping out moisture and bacteria. And this is why God requires salt to be part of all the offerings, as we read in Leviticus 2. Every grain offering of yours, moreover, you shall season with salt, so that the salt of the covenant of your God shall not be lacking from your grain offering. With all your offerings you shall offer salt. We too are meant to help preserve this earth by being the salt, as Matthew says in chapter 5. The problem in our food is man's manipulation of salt's preservative characteristics and adding it in excessive quantities. For example, in modern day bread, if I was to bake a loaf of bread and I would put 5 milliliters of salt, it would taste delicious, but within 24 hours it would be hard and dry and stale. So what commercial bakeries will do is just add loads and loads of salt into the dough, but then to counteract the saltiness, it's also packed with a lot of sugar. So to hide the saltiness, sugar is added, and then this excessive salt loses its flavor. And we see God's verdict on what we should do with salt that has lost its flavor. So here in Luke 14 we read, "Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is of no use, either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown away." The last item I want to touch on from our title, Eating the Rainbow. It's very important for our diet to always endeavor to contain not just of 5 fabulous food groups, but a range of rainbow colors, because it's the variety in the colors that contains the critical range of nutrients that we need. So if we look at some of the examples here of the foods that fit into these color bands, let's start off with red. We know, for example, tomatoes contain a lot of lycopene. But also remember that the other foods that would contain a lot of lycopene would be something like a pink grapefruit and a watermelon. Then if we go and look at the orange fruits, remember kids were always told that you have good eyes if you eat your carrots. So we know they've got orange vegetables contain a high concentration of vitamin A. Yellow contain a high concentration of vitamin C, etc., etc. We know that vitamin K, that's potassium, is really important to eat your green things, but also remember that things like spinach and lettuce also contain a very high concentration of vitamin C. So essentially, the wider your colors in your diet and on your plate of food, the better your chance of having all the range of nutrients that you need. Blue and purple tend to have very, very similar. They contain a lot of anthocyanins. So always remember that God designed us, so He knows what we need to sustain ourselves and to lead healthy lives. So, as we do with every other aspect in our lives, we always go back to His guide for us, the Bible. So this afternoon I'm going to leave you with a wise man's words from Ecclesiastes 9. Go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Thank you.